Hello, brave writing friends. Today we are re-airing a fabulous interview that Melissa and I did with the incredible Shannon Watts. Many of you will know her as the founder of Moms Demand Action, which was the largest grassroots organization in the United States dedicated to sane gun laws. And I am excited for you to listen again because this podcast gave us the hints about Shannon's new book that will be released in June. The book is called Fired Up: How to Turn Your Spark into a Flame and Come Alive at Any Age. Shannon interviewed me and Melissa, and amazingly, both of us are included as examples of fire starters in her book, which I think is just incredible. You can order her book now before it comes out in June at firedupbook.com. I think that you will get so much out of reading these awesome adult stories, and you will feel inspired to pursue your own awesome adulting adventure when you read Shannon's amazing book. So let's tune in and listen. And if you need a direct link to make your pre-order, you can go to the show notes. It's so great to see you, Shannon. Thank you for coming to our podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
I was looking through your wonderful book, and I have it right here. I'll show you. I have my little tabs. And the thing that struck me as what I loved so much about your writing about Moms Demand Action and how you entered into that life of being this activist is that you really took seriously the vision, passion, and drive of mothers. Can you talk a little bit about why the mom part of this activism was so essential? Like, you didn't say parents demand action or adults demand action. What is it about being a mother that was so important to this cause?
Well, first of all, I'm a mom of 5. And when the Sandy Hook school shooting happened, they ranged in age from elementary to middle school to high school. And when I saw the horrific footage of these families gathering in a parking lot to find out whether their children had survived after this tragedy, I, as a mother, could not fathom that, I would drop my children off at school and that they wouldn't be alive when I went to pick them up. Mm. And also, I would say I was a teen in the 1980s when Mothers Against Drunk Driving came into, the national zeitgeist. And I can remember sitting in class in my high school and looking out the window, and here were these women pulling a car up onto the grass in front of my high school. And this car was all crumpled and there was blood inside it. And it sent a really visceral message, which was, if you drink and drive, you might kill yourself or someone else. And I just thought to myself, wow, these women are not messing around. And, within a decade, they changed state and federal laws making drunk driving a crime. And when I started Moms Demand Action, what I realized was there weren't enough laws. There weren't enough responsibilities that went along with gun rights. Those had been stripped away. And so just like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, I wanted to work with other mothers to restore those responsibilities and to have the same kind of success that they had had. And I just think, and I know this now, I thought this then, I know now, that women and mothers are the secret sauce to organizing in this country. They get things done.
That's incredible.
I was so struck in your book where you say that moms make the best activists on earth. It's a really powerful statement.
Something I've learned in writing this book I'm writing, and I think Julie and I actually talked about this, is this misnomer about women being incredible multitaskers. And I prided myself on that for so long, not realizing it was sort of a sexist or societal trope that I had bought into. But what I will say is that, unlike my husband, for reasons I'm not really sure I understand, I care very much about everything that's happening, and I feel complicit if I don't rise to the occasion and help work on those things. I don't know if that's what I was taught. I don't know if it's, part of my gender. I don't know what it is, except that I know that if you endanger my children, I will come at you a million times harder. And I have seen this play out over and over and over again through Moms Demand Action. Women who have never been activists, who maybe have a completely different political belief system or religious system or cultural system than I do, and suddenly their child simply goes through a lockdown drill and has to rehearse their death in the bathroom of their classroom. And that mother, that's it for that mother. They realize they don't have to live that way. Their children should never die that way. And they get involved, and they are ferocious. I mean, I'm talking about forces of nature. And so I'm not sure I can even tell you why that is, but it is where we are right now as a society, and we have to be pragmatic and pull all the levers of power available to us. And one is putting moms on the front lines of activism.
I immediately thought of the mothers of the disappeared that challenged the junta in Argentina in 1977 to 1983 when you were saying that. These women were motivated by family more than politics, and they gathered in front of the presidential palace and the National Cathedral, all to demonstrate what they were opposed to, which was these children disappearing and nobody being accountable for that. And I think about what you're saying, that what we're really expressing is the longing of the human heart for safety for the people we love. And so when we're thinking about motherhood, I do think there must be, on some level, a biological connection here. I took a video of a mother bear shepherding two cubs across the highway in Asheville. I was in Asheville last weekend, and that video now has almost 12 million views. Because there is something in us that says, I trust the mother bear. She's going to do what it takes to bring these cubs to safety. And so, I have always felt like you do, that mothers have kind of a unique gift or a unique calling. It's not to lessen the value of other people. It's just a unique angle. And so I found that really powerful about your work, because at the same time, Shannon, you come across as quite the feminist. I love your Instagram account. You are championing women on multiple levels. So can you talk a little about that as well? Because your current book that you're writing and the work that you're doing on Instagram extends beyond Moms Demand Action. Where are you headed? What are you up to now?
Well, going back to this idea of, being both a champion of women and mothers, and how that dovetails with feminism, I get asked all the time, why did you call it Moms Demand Action? You're really excluding men, you're excluding dads or other family members. And my answer is always, because women need to feel empowered. We only hold about 25% of the 500,000 elected positions in this country. We're only about 3% of Fortune 1000 CEOs. And yet we're the majority of the voting public, right? So we don't have the power to make the policies that protect our families. However, if we use our voices and our votes, we can affect real change. So look, when there's parity, I think they should change the name. Great idea. But until then, a lot of women tell me when they put this red shirt on, they feel like it's a cape, like they are suddenly imbued with superpowers. And I think that's why they are willing to stand up to gun extremists, almost always men who are armed with AR-15s. And I think there's something powerful about that juxtaposition. There's these women who are wearing red shirts who are demanding the protection of their families and communities. And there's these men who are armed with guns who are trying to intimidate and silence them. And I think picture of that paints 1,000 words. After about 11 years of being a full-time volunteer leader for Moms Demand Action, I ran out of juice. And I also realized, this was a huge fire in my life that had been burning for a long time, and it was time to put it out. Not the entire thing, just my own personal fire, because there's more to do. I'm 53 years old, and I want to do other things in this lifetime. And I want to take the skills and all of the learnings from Moms Demand Action and use them in other ways. Now, I'll be honest, I thought after I stepped back, I would take a year off. I would take a break. And instead, I got a call from Maria Shriver who said, I have this book in print. I would love you to write about anything that has to do with women in leadership. And what I kept coming back to was this idea that I had created and overseen maybe the world's largest real life field experiment for what happens when you show women how their abilities and their burning desires and their values align, and how they come alive and can achieve things they never imagined possible. I mean, I have seen it over and over again. Women who just come to a Moms Demand Action meeting and suddenly they are alive. Maybe they become the data lead, and that experience leads them to stand up for themselves in other parts of their life. I've spoken with so many women who said, because of Moms Demand Action, I got the confidence to leave a bad marriage. I was able to start speaking up for myself. I went back to school. I started my own organization. I asked for promotion. It isn't always doing more. It's also doing less, but it is revolutionary and transformative. And so I wanted to write about that. And I've had dozens and dozens of conversations with amazing women who have told me their stories. And I want to make sure those get shared with the world.
Wow.
It's so inspiring. A really exciting project.
I know. I love it. Part of what really stood out to me in what you were expressing there is the epiphany moment when the woman realizes that she does actually have the talent, the skill, the drive. Can you talk about why that lays dormant and what catalyzes it?
Well, I mean, I think you both know this as well as I do, which is, women just start to take on all of the debris, visible and invisible, that accumulates over a lifetime, right? Of sexism, misogyny, all these different cultural norms, the way we're expected to behave, the things we're expected to do, whether that's invisible labor or mental load, all of these things we've become more familiar with in our generation. But you don't even realize that those things are tamping you down. And I think we also have so much shame or guilt in pushing up against those cultural norms that we kind of fall into different traps when we do. And it's just so easy to get stuck in those traps. For example, if you feel shame about something, your inclination may be to disappear. You have this brilliant idea and it just starts getting going. I'm using the metaphor of fire in my book, and like you're just starting to grow your fire. And it feels the blowback or the backlash you experience just is so triggering of those feelings of shame and guilt that you hide, you disappear. And I've seen this happen so much too, where women just have all of these great ideas and are primed to take action. And just as they get going, they backtrack. And so I talked to someone who said, you need to write a book about how you didn't stop, how you didn't double back, how you kept doubling down. And I do think, it is helpful for women to know, here's what you're going to go through when you step out into the arena, when you want to grow your fire. And if you do these things, you can actually practice how to undo them or to avoid them. And so that's a big part of the book too, which is just like, you're going to face these obstacles and these hurdles, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, and you're going to have to get comfortable feeling uncomfortable.
Which sounds like motherhood.
Yes. And maybe that's why women make such good activists, because anyone who has a teen knows that's true.
Yes.
Or pregnancy, for that matter. In Fight Like a Mother, you use this term that I just love, accidental advocacy, that really resonated with me, because if you had told me 20 years ago when I was holding my newborn son, my fourth child, in my arms, that being his mother would one day lead to me being an advocate for disability supports, meeting with state legislators and really fighting for a robust support network, I could not have foreseen that coming. Accidental advocacy is exactly what describes my journey with my son, and then a larger movement of disability supports.
I think that so many women can identify with that. I mean, I certainly still do. I never imagined I was going to be the word activist, which has so many different connotations to it, right? But I think when we look at it like fierce warriors, right, or joyful warriors, this idea that I think it's really important too, when you have privilege in society, that you use it to help lift other people up, that you shine a light on the work that they're doing. I am a white mom who lived in the suburbs and I was afraid my kids weren't safe in their schools. When I came to the issue of gun violence, what I realized was mass shootings and school shootings are about 1% of the gun violence in this country. The gun violence is killing 120 people every day, wounding hundreds more. Disproportionately Black and brown people is with handguns and often in city centers and often suicide. And so it's really important, I think, that we listen to, Alice Walker. Her words were, activism is the rent I pay to live on the planet.
Oof.
That's how we need to think of what we're doing. We're mothers and we're caretakers, but there is so much value that comes personally from being caretakers of other people. And I think I sometimes talk about having been an activist as touching the divine. I never found that through religion, but when I worked in community with so many other women and mothers, and we were beating back bad laws and passing good laws and handing out literature about secure storage at farmers markets. I can remember the most juiced I ever felt was when I was walking in a parade in Denver with Moms Demand Action volunteers, and a woman yelled out from the sidelines, "Girls," to her daughters. That's the group of women who convinced your dad to get a gun safe.
Woo! Wow.
I think that it's so energizing for us personally, but it's also the onus is on us to do this work.
James Cone, the Black theologian, says that the reason that God seems absent in the white church is because God is with the hurting, God is with the harmed, the marginalized, and that when you align with the oppressed, his book is called God of the Oppressed, that's when you touch divinity. What you just said, and I just thought that was incredibly beautiful as a way to understand also why activism is so life-changing. I remember when I had my children, especially my first child, I was living abroad. I lived in Morocco at the time, and I learned how to breastfeed from Moroccan women. And I came back to the States, and I, at the time, joined a La Leche League organizational meeting. And the next thing you know, I was leading meetings. I was making phone calls. It comes so often through your personal experience, right? And actually paying attention to that inclination and then not dismissing the power that your one small voice has. You might not start an organization like Moms Demand Action, but you can actually participate in the ones that exist and contribute your feelings, your resources, your time, and actually make a difference. And that fortifies your sense of self. It's powerful.
Something I noticed during my interviews with women is they all talk about a legacy. And then every time they talk about the legacy, they say, not that I have an inflated sense of self, or I know that's a really big fancy word. And I thought that was really interesting because I don't think men think of their legacy that way. And, it's not about putting your name on a building or having a hospital named after you. It's the narrative that you want written about what you did during your lifetime at the end of your life. And something I learned writing this book was that the most common deathbed regret that people have is that they didn't get to live a life that was true to them. And I think that's particularly true for women who are always trying to live a life according to what other people think or want them to do. And so I do think we need to take this idea of legacy. Like, when we get to the end of our lives, is it that we were enmeshed with our children and we were selfless caretakers and we never took time for ourselves, even if they're grown adults? Or is it that we set an example, that they saw their mothers do things that lit them up, that made them come alive, that served as a role model for them so that they could do the same and not have regrets at the end of their life either. And that's just, I think, a really interesting conversation to be had.
Oh, I'm taking it all in because this is so rich. I'm thinking about there are studies that indicate that men are more likely to apply for a job even if, they don't meet all of the qualifications listed in the job listing, and women are more likely to read the job listing and be like, "Oh, I don't meet all those specs, so I just won't apply." What advice do you have for moms who want to work for change, but feel unprepared or unqualified, unequipped?
I think that's another one of those traps we fall into, right? That we feel guilt or shame, and we are used to being told, it's this idea of imposter syndrome. I don't know if you know who America Ferrera is. She's the actress.
Yeah.
And someone asked her recently about imposter syndrome, and she said, we need to reframe what imposter syndrome is. It is natural and normal for women to feel like they've never been in the space before, or to feel like they are the first in the space, because they often are, especially women of color. That doesn't mean you're an imposter. It means it's the first time anyone has done this, and no one gave you a manual, right, on how to do it. So I do think it's important to reframe that, because every woman I spoke to said they have struggled with imposter syndrome. But when I started Moms Demand Action, what I saw over and over again in activism was that most nonprofits were run by men or think tanks, and women were expected to do sort of the menial labor. They were supposed to make the snacks, set up chairs, get the spaces, and then men would take the spotlight and set the strategy. I find that enraging, because you don't teach women how to do all of those things and get to take the credit and get to have the experience and feel confident. And so at Moms Demand Action, you are going to make the snacks and set up chairs, but you're also going to be on the evening news, telling that local reporter what you're doing and why you're doing it. You're also going to decide what is the best kind of activism for your community. And it's a matter of practice, because once you see these women do these things and then do them successfully, I mean, we're all going to fail. We're all going to make mistakes. It's just a matter of how much tolerance, right? Getting back to being comfortable with getting uncomfortable and getting through those and trying them. I mean, I was terrified of public speaking when I started Moms Demand Action. In fact, if you had said to me, you will have to do public speaking, I would have said, I don't think I'm starting this organization. And I almost passed out the first time I had to speak to a crowd, and that feeling didn't go away for a good year or two. And now I could go speak extemporaneously to a crowd of thousands, and it wouldn't really bother me. So at the end of the day, it's just doing it over and over. But I don't think women either give themselves a chance to do that, to put themselves in a situation where they'll fail, or society doesn't give them the opportunity. And so they have to take it.
So I want to talk to you about my brand new book that's coming out April 15th. But I notice I have like this twinge of reluctance. And I was trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, and this is what I realized. This is my fourth book I've told you about. And so there's a bit of a difference between announcing my very first book and the fourth one. It's sort of like the difference between saying, hey, I'm pregnant for the first time, and everyone throws you a shower and buys you gifts. And by the fourth kid, you're like, I'm pregnant. It's my fourth baby. And everyone's like, good for you. But here's the funny thing about this particular book. It really is the culmination of everything I've worked on for 25 years in Brave Writer. My publisher came to me and said, Julie, don't you want like a book, a book that can be checked out off of a library shelf, a book that can be purchased and listened to while you're washing dishes or taking a walk? And I realized that's true. It would be nice to create something that could outlive me, that wasn't just curriculum, but could help parents of kids who are in school as well, not just the homeschooling community. And then I wondered, well, what would be the angle I should take for that project? And I suddenly knew. If I think about the number one complaint of kids around writing, it's this. They say, I hate writing. And that's when I knew I had it. This book is called Help, My Kid Hates Writing. And my goal is to transform both the experience of your young writer and your experience coaching them in writing. I know you're going to like it because I tried to make it interesting to read. I have humor, examples, and a lot of information that you won't get from our Brave Writer curriculum. There's a whole chapter on AI. There is a lot of attention paid to healing the damage that writing instruction in its traditional format cause to adults and kids. So thanks for pre-ordering, especially in hardback, which helps the book make bestseller lists. Wouldn't that be cool to have a book written by someone in the home education space actually show up on one of those bestseller lists? I'd be amazed if that ever occurred, but I'd love it to happen. So thank you. You can order this book anywhere books are sold, but we will include a link in the show notes to my brand new author website. I figured by the time I had a fourth book, I probably needed a website as an author. So you can take a look at that as well. Thanks again for all your support over the years. I hope this book helps you, helps your cousins, helps your best friends, helps the lady that is the writing coach that you hired to help your kid. Thanks for pre-ordering. Make sure you hang on to your receipt. We have some pre-order bonuses coming that you won't want to miss, and I'll share about those soon. Again, it's Help, My Kid Hates Writing, How to Turn Struggling Students into Brave Writers. Go to juliebogartwriter.com. Well, that reminds me of the one quote I wrote down that I really wanted you to address, because part of this nurturing nature that is female is wanting all relationships to be peaceful and harmonious. But here's what you wrote. When you take a stand for something and start devoting time and energy to making a change, it can send ripples out into your world that knock a few relationships loose. And what I'm wondering is, when you have this fierce desire to make a difference, we talk about this with homeschooling all the time. You're taking this completely antithetical way of educating your children and believing that you have enough sort of smarts and cojones to do it. And then you've got people telling you that you're ruining your children's lives, or you're somehow, undermining the public school system. That can be enough to make people not do it. How did you handle the obvious extreme blowback you got? Because you had people like television pundits and senators taking shots at you. I read all about your Twitter battles. How did you get comfortable with losing or knocking these relationships loose? And what encouragement would you give to women for how to build the stamina for that kind of race?
Yeah, we're going to get criticism and blowback for whatever we do. And Ashanti Golar, who runs Emerge, when she counsels women who are on the fence about whether they want to run for office, she said, people are going to criticize you no matter what. You might as well have them criticize you for doing something significant, right? And it is going to happen. You are going to get blowback, and you're going to have to figure out how you want to deal with that. My dad, who is very conservative, we're very different people. He was not supportive of my Moms Demand Action work and thought I was, an affront to the Constitution of America. And it took a long time and a lot of conversations. And he finally came around and is actually a Moms Demand Action volunteer now. But I think you have to make a choice, which is, who are you going to listen to? I wanted to keep that relationship with my dad. So I kept at it and had a lot of conversations with him, but I don't care about what gun extremists think about me. And you might have sort of a prescribed burn in your life where relationships and ideas and things that served you in the past no longer do. And you have to get comfortable with that too, right? Again, this idea of Moms Demand Action volunteers who said to me, I had to move, or I had to get out of a bad marriage, or I had to quit a job, or, once you get confidence in yourself, you can kind of look at your life or the landscape of your life and say, what is serving me and what isn't? And it's also back to this idea of, it's not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about doing less.
Yes.
I talked to one woman who said she realized that she was drinking too much and she was on social media too much. And when she figured out a way to eradicate those things from her life, it opened up space for new relationships, for new activities. And we should always be doing sort of this prescribed burn and looking at, how do we keep making sure that we're evolving?
I love that.
Shannon, as you were speaking, I was suddenly remembering a time when one of my actions had a big impact on other people. I didn't know that would be the outcome of what I was doing. And so I think that that happens a lot for women, that we do make some kind of a stand on behalf of our child. In my case, it was I had an infant who needed anesthesia frequently because she was going through treatment for leukemia. And I knew from, Julie, you mentioned La Leche League. I knew from La Leche League that breast milk acts like a clear fluid. So she should be able to nurse up to 3 hours prior to the procedure. But they were saying, no, it's 8 hours or 12 hours. And that's really hard for a baby. And so I asked, they made the anesthesiologist looked into it at my request, and he said, you're right. And he changed the policy for the whole hospital. So all the babies who came through thereafter got to nurse up until 3 hours before their surgeries or their procedures. It was a big deal, but I didn't know. So you're really speaking to that powerful impact that women have because something has propelled us to the forefront in a way. Like I, at that time, was in my 20s and was not comfortable bucking authority in any way. Now I relish the opportunity to buck authority, but maybe that's the difference between 25 and 55. I noticed that you, in Fight Like a Mother, you give women a lot of tools and strategies. And part of what seems to have been so successful with the way the organization functions is that it's a big tent, and people are able to take on roles that do feel comfortable at first. Even if there's that sort of discomfort and pushing into new territory, they are able to play on their strengths. How did that happen as the organization grew?
I mean, I think it's a lot like the example you just gave. And if we're going to stick with the fire metaphor, it's this idea of a bonfire, right? How have women been sharing information and stories and some people would call it gossip, but like incredibly important information that can be the difference between life and death, like your story about breastfeeding, right? And that is how I think female community works, and it works well when we're allowed to interact and have these conversations. And another example of that, I think, is menopause, right? All of these male doctors have been telling us for a generation that we shouldn't go on hormone replacement therapy because it'll give us breast cancer. And lo and behold, Gen X gets to be the age if they go through menopause, and they're like, wait a minute. Does the data bear this out? How do we start having these conversations? How do we share information? I mean, I just had coffee this morning with a woman who I met online who wanted to know more about hormone replacement therapy. I'm not a doctor, but her doctor is serving as a gatekeeper, right? And so I think these conversations, it is all about women in community. And when a woman walks into a Moms Demand Action volunteer, and they're surrounded by dozens or hundreds of other women who have information or talents and abilities or counsel that will help them thrive and grow, they want that community.
That's right.
It is very hard. There's a reason that Moms Demand Action is really one of the only volunteer grassroots-based organizations in the country, right? There are tons of other causes that would love it. Climate, abortion, you name it, right? They would love to have this built-in grassroots network of activists. It is very difficult to do because once you bring volunteers in, it's difficult to make them stay. They come, they do something maybe after mass shooting, and they leave. We have had this amazing retention rate. Why is that? So we ask our volunteers that question. They said two things. One, they feel like we're winning. So that's the importance of always showing people, even celebrating the smallest wins. And if they lose, reframing those, right? It's called losing forward in our organization. This idea that maybe you lost, but you learned different things. Maybe you grew your chapter. Maybe you created new relationships with lawmakers. Who knows what that is, but it actually was a win, and it helped set you up to actually win the next time. So that's one reason. The second reason volunteers stay is because they find their people. And once you find your best friends, and that's what I've seen happen over and over again. I meet women who I think have known each other their entire lives and they just met through Moms Demand Action. Once you meet your people, you are incentivized to stay because you want to be around those people. And I joke that we've created like a Mary Kay. These volunteers come in as volunteers, then they want to be leaders, then they want to be part of the organization. It's almost like they're going to get a pink Cadillac or something at the end. They just keep wanting to give more and more and be a part of it because it makes them feel empowered through community.
That's so gorgeous. And literally, it's the grassroots story of homeschooling. I mean, you just described what we've all been through in this attempt to reform education. It's the same kind of spirit, right? You find your people, you're on a mission together, you serve in various ways to advance the mission. And I think what's really powerful is that because we're stay-at-home moms delivering education to our kids, sometimes we're part of a bill passing, sometimes we're just setting up chairs and having a meeting and helping someone else, decide not to put their kids in school. It can feel like it isn't important. And I think what I'm hearing you say and what I find so beneficial about your work is that it's all important, because finding your people is important. Having something to do that is what you grew up as an adult to do. Raising children is wonderful, but if the only job you have when you get to adulthood is raising kids, that's true for all women. The only people who are, bottling Pantene and running for office are men. So women do have an opportunity, right, to use their life force as an adult in addition to their role as a mother. And I think you've just done an amazing job of modeling that. Do you have any other examples of people you've been talking to with very different experiences than yours in different arenas as you're writing this book and doing this research for your fire starters?
Oh my gosh, I have spoken with women from all walks of life, celebrities and everyday women, and their stories just blow me away. And I think what I find so fascinating is that women are so self-aware. They know their limitations. They, as you said, want to find meaning and purpose in their lives. And that doesn't mean, I don't love the idea of like, you were born on earth and you have one purpose and you're going to have to spend the rest of your life looking for it.
No.
You can find meaning and purpose every day in the things you're doing because they do impact other people or they make you feel, more empowered or more fulfilled. And I'm just astounded at the women who are creating these communities and doing things where they live that are so revolutionary, and the bravery that it takes to keep stepping into the arena day after day. I speak to a lot of women who have never had any desire to run for office, and suddenly, they learn the skills through Moms Demand Action, and it's sort of the intuitive next step. And I've said this before, if you spend a lot of time in state houses, you realize these are not rocket scientists. Sadly. And if you are a caring, compassionate person, you are more than qualified to run for office and to be elected, and probably would make an amazing lawmaker just based on the fact that you're caring and compassionate and kind. And so many women have now become city council members or school board members or state legislatures. Even a couple of our volunteers have run for Congress and won. And now they're in this completely different capacity where they are making the policies and they are changing the dynamic, and the policies they're making are much more woman-centered. So, I'm really astounded by women who run for office, but I also spoke to this one woman who was a Moms Demand Action volunteer. She was raised in an impoverished family of many children. She ended up having a child who was neurodiverse. She worked at night in order to go to school with him during the day and to be his champion at school.
Wow.
What she learned about the education system, she never was able to go to college because her family didn't have the money. But what she learned while she was being a champion for her child, she learned the ins and the outs of the school district system. So suddenly she was asked to be on her school board. Then she was asked to be on the school district board. She became the third only ever Black woman to run the entire national PTA.
Wow.
And this was all born out of a love of her child and a desire to fix the system and to make it more equitable and diverse, right? I mean, those kind of stories just blow me away.
I'm a part of an organization just as on the advisory board for an organization called Summer Camp Reading that started here in Cincinnati. And it was started by a woman who was noticing that she's a former educator, and she started noticing that third graders were falling through the cracks with reading, and fourth grade is like this major reading test that they all have to go through. And so she, because of her own passion, she's in a retirement age, she's dedicated all of her energy to starting these summer camp programs, gets them completely funded, nonprofit, uses teachers from the school districts where these kids go and pays them a good amount of money, and they direct the programs. And Brave Writer has supported it for multiple years. But what struck me is exactly what you said, seeing a need, responding to it, dedicating time. And in her case, she's in her retirement years. She's in her 70s. Like, we don't know when these moments are going to hit. It may not hit when you're raising 5 babies, right?
Right.
But staying connected to the idea that you matter is what matters, right? And then finding those opportunities to contribute, whether it's that small amount or eventually activating an entire vision, or harnessing what you do know to support somebody else who already has that vision, which I think these are all different ways to be involved, isn't it? It's not just up to you to start your own organization.
No, absolutely. I've spoken with women who are in their 70s and, published their first book because of an idea they got during retirement. There are all these stories about how women post-menopause are still finding meaning and purpose in new ways that they never expected. One Moms Demand Action volunteer who's 57 is spending the year at Harvard Divinity School. And she's studying how organizing has become the new religion, right? A way to bring women together when not so many people are going to church or places of worship anymore. I just think it's fascinating and also imperative that we stay open and look for opportunities to mentor other people, but also to keep learning and doing different things. I'm this fall going to start a program at Boston University to learn more about genealogy. Not because I want a career in it, but because I've always been fascinated by genealogy. It has nothing to do with guns. It has nothing to do with writing a book, but I just want to keep learning and growing. And I think women are often taught that is selfish and that we need to be selfless. And I talk in this book about how we need to be self-full. We need to be so full of ourselves and what we want and desire. And I think the positive ripple effects in our life, for our children, for our marriages, for our partnerships, for our careers, whatever it is, it pays dividends.
That's what we call awesome adulting in Brave Writer. Absolutely. I completely support everything you said. Wow.
When you were telling the story about the mom who went on to be so involved in education, you mentioned that she was asked to run for school board and she was asked to serve some functions. You make me think, there are times where it might just be a good idea for us to sit down and say, if I were somebody else and I was going to ask me to do a thing, what would I, knowing me, ask me to do? Like, where is all this latent expertise and experience that I have? That I think it's just a good question to ask ourselves sometimes. What am I keeping a lid on that your phrase about the fire, I mean, gosh, what a great metaphor for all the ways that we can take the lid off and let the fire flame up a little bit.
I mean, I think a big part of this is like before culture put all this baggage on you as a woman, what did make you come alive? I have always been, I can remember I was obsessed with Watergate as a child, which is kind of weird, but I can see the through line now. I was a writer my whole life. I wrote a book on a manual typewriter when I was 8. Like, I can look back and look at all the things that really made me me. And that's different for everybody, right? So what are your values? What are your abilities? Because we all have different abilities. And then what are your burning desires? And then how do you start taking little steps toward those things? It doesn't have to be, getting divorced and quitting your job and moving to another country. It can be as simple as, I'm going to sign up for a volunteer meeting, or I'm going to take this weekend class. I became obsessed with flower arranging during COVID. And I just started to learn online, and it really brought me a lot of joy. Maybe I'll use that skill someday, maybe I won't. But I think it's another way of showing that, like, I was indulging myself and just playing and dabbling. And we don't give ourselves permission to do that. I think we get so focused. I mean, I spend a lot of the time talking about in the book where pre-Moms Demand Action, I was not a happy person. I was in a job I didn't love, in a marriage that wasn't working. I had horrible eczema to the point where, I could hardly function, and I never slept. And I was just overwhelmed and miserable. And I went through the whole process I see Moms Demand Action volunteers go through in order to get to a place where I felt like, okay, I'm doing something that has a lot of purpose and meaning, and it's going to change my life. It's not going to be my whole life. I'm not going to do this forever, but it's going to be an important part of my life. And that's how we need to teach women to start looking. We say, go to college and then get a job that you're going to make a lot of money. And it's funny because I've interviewed so many children who are immigrants or children of immigrants, and the pressure on them to be doctors and lawyers is so immense, right? It's not, how do you find joy? How do you find happiness in your life? It's how do you find stability, which I understand if your parents have sacrificed everything for you. But I think it's important as women that we also think about, when I get to the end of my life, what will my deathbed regrets be? And how do I try to make sure I don't have those?
Yeah. And, the regrets that we've been told we're going to have to do with not spending enough time with our children, because those are men's regrets. And I said on a podcast where I was being interviewed, I said, I actually started to have the regret that I hadn't dedicated enough of myself to my potential, because I had put so much into my children. And it was helpful to realize that my children were only about 25 years of my adult life, because life is long, hopefully, and in my case, true. I didn't write my first book for publication till I was 57. I went to grad school in my 40s. Like, there is time and room, but I agree with you. I have invested in my children. I did. So that regret off the table, and might be true for many women. And so imagine the opportunity that you have. There's one comment you made that I thought was really interesting. I want to ask you about it. You said that social media is a woman's bullhorn, and it was the idea that you gendered it that really caught my imagination. Back in the 90s, I was in my mid-30s when the internet opened its doors. And I always say homeschool moms were the first ones in because we were so isolated and lonely. And we suddenly found that we were smarter than we knew. We had opinions. We knew how to write. We wanted to communicate. We were willing to go to bat for the things we believed in, sometimes, to the level of trolling. I'm not saying we did it artfully. But during this sort of next 30 years, I feel like women have had more of a voice because of the opportunities that the internet has provided us. Do you see it having leveled the playing field then with men, like this access? Is that what you're getting at?
A couple things. So the first is that it has been, and certainly Twitter has changed. It was, when I started Moms Demand Action, Facebook was at its zenith and Twitter was just emerging. And those two tools helped us organize online and also push up against lawmakers, right? The whole goal here is to shame and thank lawmakers who are doing the right or wrong thing. And it was such an effective way to do that. And, we were able to get some companies to change their policies that were allowing open carry inside their stores in just a weekend using hashtags like burritos, not bullets. Chipotle changed like in 2 days.
Amazing.
So I don't know how Mothers Against Drunk Driving did it. Like, did they get in their cars and drive to each other's homes? Did they call on their rotary phone? Did they send letters? I don't know how these women did it, but social media completely transformed activism. But the other side to this is that, and the data bears this out, media and really the public in general trusts and gives more credibility to male experts than women.
They do.
It just happens over and over again, even in the year of our Lord, Beyonce 2024. We are seeing men get prioritized over women. I don't know if you saw this this picture of a podcast where two men were talking about menopause. Two male experts. Yes.
What?
So it's ridiculous. And here I am. I have started the largest grassroots organization in the country. I was never asked to do a TED Talk. I had to often fight against men to talk about activism. And so when you're able to use social media, you can completely bypass that male-focused media world and get your story out. And what I think I used Twitter very effectively to do was to show the work of our volunteers, work that would have been completely invisible because men don't really care. But when women sit in a Senate gallery for 12 hours and breastfeed and knit, all day long to stop a bad bill or to pass a good bill, like, they deserve to be celebrated. And so social media really enabled that.
I remember you telling me that you had never been invited to be on 60 Minutes, and my jaw dropped. Like, we've heard from the head of the NRA, we've heard from, Moms of Liberty. We've heard why do you think that is, Shannon? Why do you think, with as much amplification of your work as there has been, that you are being bypassed by traditional media outlets? What is that about in your mind?
I mean, it's obvious. It's definitely misogyny and sexism. But, what I've noticed is even when I'm included in a high profile program, I'm almost always the person they go to for the emotional weight. So they want to hear from me the anecdotes, the compassion, they don't see me as a policy expert.
Wow, that's insane.
I remember I was on NPR with another man, and the host kept asking the man about policy and me about feelings. And I saw all these tweets like, why are you, I'm listening to you right now. Why is Shannon Watts only being asked these questions about feelings? It's so gendered.
That's wow.
You make a strong argument in your book about that's why it's important to be armed with the facts, to go in with data. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is not a polarizing issue, the issue of gun safety. When you talk to the vast majority of Americans, regardless of political party, 80 to 90% of Americans support common sense gun laws like background checks and training and red flag laws and disarming domestic abusers. It's really just the extremists who are beholden to a special interest in state legislatures and Congress who have refused to act. I think that will change eventually. But when you're having these conversations, because we live in a polarized nation, it's really important to come with the facts, come with the data, come with important and emotional anecdotes, but to be able to hold your own. And that's something we train our volunteers to do right out of the gate. And it does change these conversations. You can sit in a lawmaker's office and, he comes in thinking, this is the mom down the street. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's so emotional. And suddenly you're sitting there and saying all the data about gun deaths where you live and how the laws work and you can prove your case. It changes. And again, I can't tell you how many times I have been in meetings with lawmakers where I knew more than they did.
Of course you did, because you were passionate about it. That's the piece that I think is really important too, that women are smart and you don't have to accept this idea that you need to qualify everything you say. I remember being in a theological discussion board back in the early 2000s. I was one of the only women. It was almost all men, and there were like a handful of women. And they would constantly ask you for your experience. They expected you to tell a story. You weren't allowed to ever just declare a fact the way a guy was. And this was before there were photos on the internet. So I created a new user account with a male name, and the difference in how I was treated was shocking. Suddenly, my opinions held weight. Even when they disagreed, they treated me like I was saying things that they could actually discuss, instead of being like, well, you don't know what you're talking about because you're a woman. And that has lived in me for decades now, this awareness that if they just couldn't see my face and I'm well enough educated and have information, I can hold my own. I remember getting into an argument one time with a man. We were actually talking, ironically, about guns. And it was after we had watched the movie Straight Outta Compton. And I was literally just asking questions, kind of the way I do in my Raising Critical Thinkers book. And at one point, he jumped to his feet. His face got red. He slammed his hands on the table and he says, "You are just wrong. That was all he had. And I thought, and women are the emotional ones? I was having this calm conversation with information, with data. So don't buy this belief that women are emotional. Women really know how to hold it together. They've had to deal with violent, abusive men for generations. We know how to stand up for ourselves. And I love that you said that. We have to change that. And I think social media is a place where we can showcase what we know and do it intelligently and, start more podcasts, please. I love listening to women. These men are all imploding.
More women podcasts.
Oh, yeah. The men are imploding. We're just watching it happen. They're like, one of my friends said, when your biceps are bigger than your head, I stop trusting you. And I thought that was the best rubric for a legit podcast.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Just go. I just suggest if you really like a podcast run by a man, go see how many women experts he's had on.
Yes. Great question. That should be the criteria right out of the gate. I love that. Shannon, when's this book going to be available?
I am not sure quite yet of the exact published date. It will be the summer of 25, and it should be available for pre-sales by the end of the year. So I don't even have a title yet. But as soon as I get through the editing process, then I will start talking more about it on Substack and Instagram and all the places on social media.
Yeah, tell us where people can follow you. Your Substack is awesome, by the way. I hope everybody follows it. Yeah. So give all that information and we'll include it all in the show notes too.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Substack is more fire metaphors. So it's called Playing with Fire. And I talk to a ton of women and showcase a lot of women and have a lot of interesting conversations there. I'm on Instagram at Shannon R. Watts. I'm still a little bit on Twitter at Shannon R. Watts. I'm on Threads and not yet TikTok, but I'm too old to be making videos.
I'm with you. I was like, you got to let something go at a certain age, and TikTok is the one.
Agreed.
Oh, this has been phenomenal. I'm so glad to know you. Thank you for just your generous life. You've really made a difference, and we benefit because of it. Thank you. You've been listening to the Brave Writer Podcast. I'm Julie Bogart, and Melissa Wiley is my co-host. This podcast is produced by Nova Media with support from team member Jeanette Hall. Thank you for listening and for leaving either a starred or written review on the podcast app of your choice. Anytime you do that, you bring a lot of joy to the team and you support our work. So thanks in advance.